Good morning, friends. Welcome to the presentation this morning. I'm looking at people seated here and trying to decide how many of you were here last week. It's church, but you can raise your hands. It's okay. Almost everybody. That helps me because the first handful of slides are from last week, situating map, black and white photo, aerial photo, that kind of thing. I'll do it quite quickly because I knew we have a couple of people, excuse me, who are here who were not here last week, but I'll do that quickly. We've got some friends here from Phoenix, but they're all very smart, so I can do it in 30 seconds. They'll get it all. And I'll go on for some new things. I will say this, friends, and all joking aside, a number of the paintings and drawings that I'll show you today that come from the very early church, they're so very faint. And whether you sit on the front row or you have a computer screen in front of you or not, some of it is very difficult to see. So I'll show you some reconstructions and diagrams of it. But I want you to see the original, so I'll say that's the original. And if you'll just do me the favor, nod your head and say, okay, we saw it. Because it's very difficult to see what's actually drawn on it, is my point. We just go from there. So today, I'll take you to Dura, Europos, where we were last week, and I will take you to what is almost certainly the oldest surviving church building in the world. So it's a one of a kind, and it raises as many fascinating questions as it gives us a quick series of snapshots into what, speaking personally now, my ancestors in the faith, or our ancestors in the faith, what they were like 1,800 years ago or so. And at the end of seeing the building, I will show you a little parchment scrap that has about 14 or 15 lines of an early Christian document combining parts of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. It's also fascinating, and if you don't find it fascinating, shame on you. Just kidding. I'm kidding. It really is wonderful stuff, and it will raise some questions about it. So how did they study the traditions and so forth? Because we now in the Christian church do Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Please nod your head. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. But there were times in the history of the church where they had harmonies and gospel parallels. And this is a fascinating example of one of those that I will show you. That's the first presentation. Take a short break, and then I will take you to the Mithraeum that was found there. The veneration or the worship of Mithras was a fast-growing religion in a number of ways. It was a rival to the growth of Christianity. They emerged at about the same time, and they both took off numerically and with fervor in certain places. And it was called a mystery religion. And I'm going to show you the Mithraeum where they met and what Mithras looked like and so forth. That'll be the second presentation. Everybody with me? Thanks for coming. This book by Michael Papard is a great and detailed study of what he calls the world's oldest church. And the nice thing about this, it's one of those open access documents. Do you recognize that phrase, good friends? So I went online and got a free copy of it, which means if I can do it, you can do it. If you'd like to have it, is the point. But it's a very, very, very thrice, very, very, very detailed study of the world's oldest church building. And so learned a lot for myself reading it. Really, really enjoyed that. Okay, here we go. I showed it to you last week. Two studies that underline the importance of Dura, Europos. Remember, it's a hybrid name. It's in Syria. It's on the banks of the Euphrates. I'm saying that for my friends now, particularly from Phoenix, because they were not here last week. And It's a wonderful study of multiculturalism, multi-language, multi-everything. Last week we looked at, remember, the temples and then that incomparable synagogue with the paintings. So it's a crossroads of antiquity, and I suggested last week, I'll do it again. Think of it like the Pompeii of the desert. It was a bustling place, and then it was besieged for a while. They built up the ramparts around the city, the walls. They got pushed in, and so a number of buildings along the western wall in particular were sealed, including the Mithraeum, the synagogue, the church. And so their loss and pain, and it was considerable, is our gain in terms of a way to get a window into the past. That was a little bit we talked about last week. There we go. So that's the Euphrates. You'll see it flowing there. You know, there was a special on the local news channel about the Colorado River that before they built the dams, you know, it gave these periodic floods that would go through. Same thing for the Euphrates. So there are dams on it now, which means that the flow on it is more controlled. But here's the Euphrates right here, and the high bluff upon which Dura, Europos was built. You'll see some of the ruins there. They will be cut stone and mud brick. You'll see both of those things there. Now here's the map we looked at. You won't get all of the details. I'll just remind you. So using current political borders and names, there's Lebanon right there, the Mediterranean. And I think I mentioned this last week. This came from a Syrian source, and so they call this area down here Palestine. And here is Jordan in Iraq right here. So this is the modern country of Syria. And, you know, such awful straits. You know, currently it's just heartbreaking. So the main road comes up like this, and then there's the Euphrates coming in there, a couple of the dams. There's Lake Assad. It's a massive reservoir out there in the desert from the Euphrates. And it comes down like this, as there are a number of cities here, and Dura, Europos is located right here. And the very famous city of Palmyra, not New York, but the very famous city of Palmyra is right here, and they were closely connected because of trade and culture and so forth. Some of you may know the most famous ruler of Palmyra, who came just after the destruction of Dura, Europos, Queen Zenobia. Is that a name that you know? You know, she was a fearsome person, expanding, and her forces took over a good swath of this territory. Palmyra was quite a city. Okay, so here I showed you again quickly from last week an aerial shot from the 1930s. I'll remind you that a French excavation team and an excavation team from Yale University in the 30s had a multi-year project to uncover parts of this city. And as a reminder, somebody asked again today, within the walls of the city, about 128, 130 acres. So here you'll see the Euphrates right there, and a water channel here, they call them wadis, and here, and a high bluff there. So the only weak point in terms of being attacked is this western wall, which was very large, and it's what got pushed in. Everybody, you may remember that from last week. Okay. So again, as a reminder of the history, it was one of Alexander the Great's generals. His name was Seleucus Nicator, and he or one of his underlings built this place for military and trade purposes. Remember when Alexander the Great died, you know, he's about 30-some years old, and he'd conquered most of the world. He died and didn't leave a will. So what do you do if you own half the world? You don't have a will. That means, as they say, where I grew up in North Carolina, you've heard me say this before, they got to fighting. And the general named Seleucus carved out a good portion of what we think of as the eastern Mediterranean parts of the Middle East. Okay, so the history of the city will go on for about 5 centuries. The Parthians who come in from the east, think of Persia or Iran today, they wanted to expand. It's just an old story, isn't it? They wanted to expand to the west. The Europeans wanted to expand to the west. The Europeans wanted to expand to the east from the west. And so the Middle East is right there in the middle. What an old story that is. Okay, so here's the Parthian Empire. Just as a reminder, Dura, Europos sits on the edge of it. It is right there. And the green would be the Parthian expansion. It was the successor to the Parthians. They're called the Sasanians. Don't worry about the spelling or anything. But they are the ones who besieged the city of Dura Europos, pushed in the walls, and brought the city to an end and sealed so many of the ruins. Okay, here it's a different angle than the picture, but if you were to look at this up close, and you don't have that opportunity now, but if you want to see the file, you can, it will list a number of things that they know. For example, the temples. But you're oriented here to the Euphrates. See how high the bluff is. In places it's 300 feet right above the water. That's very defensible because you had the plains around it, but the harder rock there gave rise to this big, tall bluff. And so here's the western wall. There was a Roman camp right here, and the Mithraeum that I'll show you was right in the corner up against the wall. So if you're trying to think about where did this, was it located in the city, the Mithraeum that I'll show you is right here, and right over here against the wall was the synagogue, and the church was right over here as well. So those are all three things, all three of which had been some form of housing or a kind of domestic building, and then developed into places of worship. Okay, so here we are. I put the term house church in quotes. That is the term that you will almost always see. I've been using it myself, but a number of people have argued there isn't any evidence that by the time the destruction of the city came along that anybody ever lived there any longer. It may have been completely given over for Christian gatherings and worship. There's quite a bit of discussion going on that now, and people argue, and they write a good article, and they get tenure. It's amazing how these things work. But we won't involve any of that. I'll just put it to you to say it is in fact the case that the use of it for Christian activities seems to be pervasive. There's no evidence that by the end anybody ever lived there. But it's still called a house church, because we all know from the New Testament that's where most Christians met, and we don't have any other model. Until after Constantine, when you start seeing surviving buildings based on the basilica model for worship. Well, what about in between here? And so this is the one example that we have. Now, in our culture, unique is an overused term, but this is unique. Excuse me, I want to go back one more thing. So here's a diagram of what you're going to look at. It has three rooms. So here was the assembly room right here. Am I coming through okay when I turn my back? I put my best side forward, as they say. So here is the meeting room, and what the archaeologists learned as they began to clear it out was that when it was a house, there was a wall right here, and they tore it down so they could expand to have an open area. It was one of the ways they could see how it had developed from a domestic use to a more for group activities. And they made this side smaller, and over here is where they put a baptismal area. And it has a frame on it right here. And then they had an open courtyard right here. And I'll show you some labels and diagrams. This photograph right here was taken, is before 2014, because as I said last week, for a while, the ISIS crazies took over here, and they can bulldoze things, and they do awful to people and so forth. This is what it looked like after it had been cleared out from the 1930s. So this would be the baptismal room right here. Here's your courtyard right there. Everybody follow me? Okay, and here would be a smaller room right here. And then your gathering room right here. The thing to note about the gathering room is, here this is the west wall. On the east wall right there, they had a raised like a dais or chancel. It stood up a little bit, and so somebody stood or sat there, and people gathered around. Now, it was not as comfortable for them as it is for us. No chairs. They may have had cushions, they may have stood, they may have had benches they could kind of bring in at the last minute. But it was primarily for gathering. And you may know that in lots of ancient churches, they didn't sit down. When they had a service, everybody stood up. And that's when you started really looking at your watch, right? How much longer am I going to stand here? Okay, here's a close-up again, you can see, just to give you some idea of scale and what it looks like. But right here, that's the baptismal was. Here's the courtyard, this kind of gathering room right here. But here was the main assembly hall right there. Okay, so here's a black and white. I love this picture. I was able to get it from the Yale University files. So after they had excavated, cleaned out all of the debris and so forth, this is what it looked like. So there's more of it still there in this picture than there is, of course, 60 years later, as you might well imagine. So friends, look with me very carefully, and you will see here, there's the arch that was built over the baptismal font. By the way, it's a big enough font that you can get in and be immersed. But clearly that was set aside. It was the one that has the paintings and so forth. One of the interesting things about the assembly hall over here, no stained glass window, no paintings, no mosaic floors, as would often be the case in places of worship. Apparently it was relatively plain, but there are paintings and so forth over here in the baptismal area, and that's what I'll show you. Even though they're faint, we'll have to look at some reproductions and real close-up photos to get any kind of idea on some of them. But you'll see there, here's the archway right there, and the main room over here, and then the back side right there are the main parts of the wall that are still standing. Everybody with me? Here's the same picture from a slightly different angle. And so here's the assembly room right here. And over there's the baptismal font, and there's the little courtyard. Remember, in a good house of this time, a good middle-class house, you have to have a triclinium place where you can sit down and eat and entertain. But it wasn't quite ready for the assembly group, and so that's why they had to make this room bigger. And yes, ma'am? I'm going to come and discuss that briefly. It's a great question, and we can have even more discussion in break and so forth. The short answer is there's no evidence that it was secretive or they were persecuted. But I'll come to this in a moment. The other side of the coin is, in the year 250, the first empire-wide persecution broke out under the emperor named Decius. And it doesn't look like it had any effect here. So it's not secretive. That's a possibility, but the other side over here was highly developed with explicitly Christian things in it. It's a great question. There's no evidence that they thought they had to hide, but there's plenty of reason for Christians at this particular time to hide. It just doesn't seem. Oh yeah. Exactly. No, the Bishop of Rome, one of the most influential Christians of the era in the year 250, remember the city was destroyed in 256? He was executed by the empire because they didn't like what he was saying. So yeah, there is lots of persecution around at this particular time. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you, Bev. She was asking about if there were no pictures or drawings where that meant they were trying to be secretive because of persecution. Thank you. And if I don't repeat the question, jump on me again, please. Okay, so I have a couple of schematics so you get an idea of what it was like there. So you'll see as the label shows you, the baptistry right here, and there are going to be some paintings here on the side. There was a modest upstairs. There was one room apparently upstairs, and then there was a roof. And so some people say, well, maybe people lived on the roof. It still may have been a house. But they used to have a cistern in the earlier period of the house, and they covered it over, and there was no cooking arrangements there. So it's kind of hard to say that many people live there if you don't have a big pool of water and no kitchen. But plenty of space to gather. Okay, so you'll see the labels here, friends. And there you see the group will be facing us towards the east, right there. So that's one way to think about it. Here's the one, is another form of it. Now, in terms of assumptions, I have them, you have them, we all have them. we go from what we know, we try to apply that template to things when we encounter something new. So here is somebody who was trying to explain to us what the early Christian life was like here, and they call this the room for the Eucharist, because the Eucharist is a central thing in Christian worship, the Lord's Supper. Right, friends? There's absolutely no evidence that they had the Lord's Supper there. Now, if I got to pull out my wallet and bet, I think they probably did. But there's nothing about the architecture and what remained to show you that's what they did. The baptistry seems to have been, at least in terms of architecture, more important. So, for example, if this church got sealed, and the architect's going, well, what was this for? What was this for? What was, based on parallels, they'd know in a heartbeat if other aspects of our civilization were lost and it was discovered, 5,000 years from now. But there's just no evidence that the Eucharist, at least the things to support it, were there. Did they probably have? Yeah, I think so. I think so. But clearly, baptism and discipleship and confirmation were the things that are most evident from this side. Everybody with me? Okay, so here's yet one more way to think about it. Your diagram here, and your baptismal area right here, and here is a reconstruction of it. They took it apart, and Yale University got it. So if you want to see the original things from the baptistry set up and well displayed, go to New Haven, Connecticut. It's there. So I'll show you several different angles on this coming up here, friends. Here's some of the paintings right here, and this is reproduction. The originals from there are on a wall hanging nearby, and I'll show you a picture of that here in just a moment. Okay, so a couple of bullet points. You folks are very clever. You can read this quickly, but the first bullet point is a discussion: is this a home church or is it actually a church building? That's part of the discussion. We do know that homes and other venues were used by early Christians. In the New Testament, and many of you will know this, there are a number of references to the meeting of Christians in people's homes. Priscilla and Aquila and Nymphaea, and a couple of others are named, Philemon, and that would be in the order. But we're told already early on when Paul was traveling, when he went to Corinth and Ephesus, in one place he rented a lecture hall in a school for 2 years. That's pretty high profile. So they can meet in various places, but typically or the homes. Now, it turns out that there was a little inscription about expanding this house for just reconstruction. They didn't say why, but it became clear that it was for the church in the year what we would call 232 or 33, and then they plastered over it a little bit later. So we know that a good bit of the expansion of the house was about that time. So it's going now for a couple of decades, but then in 256, it all comes to a tragic end. The second bullet point, it's hard to know what about the origins, the cultural origins of these people in a town where so many people are coming in and out. There are a couple of graffiti names that were uncovered, and one of them is Proclus, and I'll show you a little inscription that he had put up there in the baptism. That's a good Greek name. And there was another one, a female, Dorothy. And so those are two good Greek names, if that's a clue. Who knows who else may have been involved in this? Almost certainly some of the soldiers would have become Christians either before they arrived or here, because that was one of the places where there was both persecution, but it grew pretty rapidly, as did the Mithraeum I'll show you in a moment. Okay, so this comes to your fine question about persecution and so forth. So you have either acceptance on the part of larger cultures in the far-flung Roman Empire. You have acceptance or toleration or indifference or persecution. I mean, all those things. And unhappiness and tension can break out periodically in area A or B, but the first empire-wide persecution started in the year 250. And so Dura Europos is right on the edge, the literal edge of the Roman Empire. And there's no evidence there of the persecution that hit. Maybe it did, but there's just no physical evidence remains about it, would be the point. So you'll see in that first bullet point, because of the traffic going in and out and about, most folks were pretty tolerant of their neighbors, because their neighbors, they had a temple here and a shrine there, lots of interaction in this city. Decius, you'll see his name right here, was the emperor. Now, I'll do this very briefly. His view was, there's lots of, you're going to think I'm talking about current day politics. His view was, we got some serious problems in the kind of unity or the administration of our far-flung empire. And one of the ways to have unity is to have everybody, whatever else they do, offer a sacrifice for the well-being of the state. And just to make sure that you'll do that and that'll cause harmony, you'll need a certificate to do that. Well, our Jewish friends, they ain't going to do it. Our Christian friends, they ain't going to do it. The Romans said, well, the Jews have not been doing it for a long time, we'll excuse them, but the Christians, they're new, they got to do it. And so that's part of the persecution, because you see, Christians were thought of as unpatriotic, because they wouldn't offer a sacrifice for the well-being. They said, no, we want the empire to be fine. You know, our tradition said we should pray for our political leaders. We're just not offering a sacrifice to them. We don't care, we don't believe they become divine at death, that kind of thing. We're just not going to do that. And so sometimes they got into trouble. And sometimes, you all will recognize this pattern, people said, you know, I've got a wife and kids, I'm a Christian, and I'm going to go and get that piece of paper and sign it, and I'll hold my breath and hold my nose. And so there are various responses. But that did cause quite a problem and persecution in various places. So, for example, you'll know the name Antioch from the book of Acts. It would be northwest of this. It's called Syrian Antioch. Early Christian history, the bishop there was killed in this persecution. The bishop of Rome was killed in this persecution. So in places it was fierce. Okay, a light moment for, you ever have a coin or some jewelry and it falls off? Where did it go? Well, somebody lost an gold engagement ring at church. And it got in the rubble, and so when they were sifting the baskets and so forth and cleaning up, they found a gold engagement ring in the church. I love that. It has the reason they call it an engagement ring is because it has a little inscription on here, and it's in Greek, and it says harmonia. Our word in English, harmony. And the Greek term meant pretty much what we mean by harmony, but it also had this element of agreement. And so that often when things had a contract signed, they say, are we in harmony? We'll say, are we in agreement? But that was a term that they used, and so to get married or for an engagement, they would often have harmony written on it. So it's a beautiful ring. And somebody lost it. Once was lost, but now you know how that goes. We got it. Okay, so here is the way they have reconstructed the baptistry in the museum there in New Haven. Look at this with me carefully, good friends. So here's one of the brightest, and they have touched it up considerably. I'll show you the original in a moment. And so you've got two women right here and coming into a building right here. We'll talk more about it. And there are a couple of them here, there's another one down here. This one is very, very faded, but I'll show you what can be seen of it. And there are a couple of others right here that are it's about a panel and a half. So the next bit, I'm just going to go through this and show it to you. Okay, here is a museum in the Netherlands, and they showed the front here so that they know pretty much what the colors were, and they left this kind of clouded because that's the way it was found. It was clouded. Hard to see. All right, the baptistry. It can support adult immersion or a vibrant sprinkling. Yeah, I got to cover my bases here. Some interpreters think that the font was not for immersion, but for anointings and purification. It probably served more than one function, as does ours right here. We use it liturgically in more than one way. But one of the important things in terms of a window into how Christianity was practiced is there were some jars, they were broken of course, which contained oil. And so a number of people have commented, well, maybe they practice a very early form of what our Eastern Orthodox friends call chrismation. Some of you will know that term as well. There are various rites in the practice of Christianity where one is symbolically anointed with oil. And less so in most Protestant traditions, but you'll see it also there. In the Eastern Church today, if one is baptized, one is also marked with the sign of the cross in oil. And so the conclusion a number of folks have drawn, I think there's something to it, is that baptism and what is often called today confirmation were put together. And a lot of places in the early church, let's say, I want to follow Christ and I want to be a member of this fellowship. And they'll say, okay, baptism for you will be next Easter. So let's just say it was August. And Easter is in early April. So what happens between now and then? You study and you prepare. And you go for the year, and some churches, for converts, would only have a service once or twice a year for adult converts like that. So confirmation and being set apart for discipleship and an emphasis on the reception of the Holy Spirit in your life was all put in baptism and the chrismation. There are good examples of this that go back to the 5th and 6th, 7th centuries of our common era in churches. Liturgies that have survived in Greek and Syriac and so forth. But if that's what was going on here, it's the earliest example that we have of something which took on additional importance as the church developed. So I'm going to show you right above the font is a depiction of Jesus as the Good Shepherd. Very, very faint. But I'll show it to you, and then I'll show you a reconstruction of it. And there are side panels on the baptistry wing. I pointed them out to you, but they were in delicate condition. Some were color and some were in charcoal. I'm going to go through each one of those briefly, and we'll see where the conversation goes. Okay, so if you go to Yale, here are the original pieces right here of the drawings from the side of the baptistry. Here is the panel that was right there in the center of it, and even sitting there, it's hard to see any kind of detail, isn't it? Here's the one that's best seen with the two women and the building. Whatever that building is, we'll talk more about it in just a moment. Okay, so the Good Shepherd. You'll see in this reproduction, here's a figure standing with the ram on the shoulder. So it's being carried like this. And you'll also see right over here a flock of sheep. And down here is a little drawing of Adam and Eve. The scholars think that it was added later, but pretty much you have to take my word for it, don't you? It's kind of hard to see. Okay. So, there it is. That's pretty hard to see, isn't it, friends? Nothing wrong with your eyes. It's just hard to see. You can see a little bit of the darkness there. Here's the figure of Jesus as the Good Shepherd with the ram on there. Here's Adam and Eve down here by the tree of life. Remember, they lost access to the tree of life, but you regain access to life in the gospel. And so that's the Good Shepherd who provides that. Nice way to represent it. Okay, here's a close-up so you can at least see the figure. Jesus is very Greco-Roman in his dress there. So what most folks will say is widespread symbol, but it goes back to a depiction that Gentiles, Europeans would recognize. A typical Jewish shepherd of the first century would have a bit different outfit on. But this would be one of your earliest depictions in a church of Jesus. Not the earliest one, but one of them. All right, so here is a black and white drawing. You can see it most clearly there. Here are your two figures of Adam and Eve down here, and here's the Good Shepherd with his Greco-Roman outfit on, and the ram there, and the gathering of the sheep. Now, how much do you read in the symbolism? They said there were 13 sheep there, so I guess it's not the 12 disciples, right, Tom? Unless they couldn't count. Maybe some baker's dozen, like donuts. They got, I don't know. But there's 13 of them. Or maybe they're including Judas, to make sure Judas got in there. I don't know. Okay, so a widespread way to symbolize the faith. Here are two examples that come from Rome in the catacombs. So here's a good example of it. Jesus, again, very Greco-Roman in his dress. And here's another one which is carved right here. So very common. Much more common, by the way, friends, than a cross. The cross will develop into one of the central symbols, and rightly so, not a complaint. But in earliest Christianity, it was less used in certain other things, like the fish, for example, or the Good Shepherd. There was no cross, by the way, in this early church. Okay, so I want to show you Jesus healing a paralytic, Jesus walking on water, women at the tomb, or processing to a bridal chamber, a woman at the well, and David killing Goliath. That's kind of an outlier there. So, are you ready? Again, remember this is the reconstruction. There were paintings all along here, and this is what survived. Okay, so if you say, Andy, I can't see anything over there, it's okay. Your eyes are fine. It's faint. But I'll give you a close-up. Just hold your horses, as they say in Texas. But here will be Jesus right here, and here's the paralytic. And here's the paralytic getting up and walking away with his bedding when he's healed by Jesus. So you can see elements of the story. It's a still drawing, but you see movement, and rightly so, for the paralytic. Here's a close-up. Everybody with me? You can see that, I believe. So there stands Jesus, and the paralytic was here. Then he gets up, and you can see that his bed is on his back. He's carrying it away. He's bedding. So he gets up and walks away. Mark chapter 2. Oh, Jesus walking on water. So Jesus is a healer. And here you'll see, here's the boat right here. I'll have a little bit closer up of it. This is about the best you can do. But here's the boat right here. And here's a figure right here. This is Peter. And you'll see about half of Jesus right there reaching out. Because remember, Peter gets out of the boat. He's so enthusiastic. Remember the story? And then he said, by golly, I'm in the water here. And so Jesus makes sure that he survives. So you've got Jesus the healer and Jesus the one who rescues from the water, and some of the other disciples in the boat right here. Matthew 14. See, I think I have some. Yeah, here you can see the colors a little bit better on this one. So you see, here's the boat. Here's Peter, and you can see right here the figure of Jesus and his arm reaching out right there. Then, of course, with the rubble, it got cut off right there at the point. Okay. Now here, women at Jesus' tomb on resurrection morning. I have a question mark. That's the way it's been interpreted by most people. So you will have two of the women coming, and they'll have something in their hand right here, and it's nighttime, or at least it's dark, so they've got lights in their hand right here. There's a star showing you it's still nighttime or still dark. And if this is the right interpretation, they're coming on Easter morning, then this would be the way to represent the tomb. We think of it as a cave with a stone in front of it. Please nod your head. It's a little more difficult to imagine it in that fashion, but anyway, that would be the interpretation. That was the main way most folks interpret it. Let me just go back here real fast, friends, so you can see. Yeah, I can do this quickly, I think. Yeah, here's the largest portion right here. Do you see the size of what we call the sepulcher, if that is the right interpretation? See, there's no labels. There's a close-up of it right here. Now, another possibility, some have suggested that it has to do with the story of the wise and foolish bridesmaids. Remember, They were waiting on the groom to come, and it was nighttime, and you had to have your lights and your oil. Those are two things. Remember, if you were a smart bridesmaid, you'd have those. And if you were a foolish bridesmaid, you didn't have them because you're waiting around. And so some folks have said, you know, if it has to do with the anointing of oil, it's important. The church as the bride of Christ and, as it were, a kind of allegory of discipleship. So they have the lights and they're waiting for the groom to come, and they're kind of dressed up, and they got their oil ready because that shows that they're prepared for what's to come, the sign of the cross, chrismation. So that's another way to interpret this. By the way, we won't take a vote. Who knows, it might be a third option is best interpreted. They did not leave an inscription for us. Okay, a woman at the well right here. And it has engendered more than one thought. Most folks thought of this as the woman at the well when Jesus goes, remember, in the area of Samaria, and he meets the woman at the well and talks about the water that gives life. That may well be correct, but another option is that this is Luke, and this is the earliest representation of Mary. Remember, in the Gospel of Luke, the angel Gabriel comes and talks to her. Well, the assumption would be, where would they meet? Well, you always meet at the well. That's the one place where everybody can get out and see each other. So who knows whether this is John 4 or Luke 1. They're both important, and they're both right. Okay, here's the close-up, the best I can do on the actual drawing itself of the woman at the well. Wouldn't you love to have a little inscription at the bottom? Okay, now here's one you really have to rub your eyes. This says David and Goliath faint. That is correct. It's a panel right here, and the best thing you can do is get a drawing of it. And jokes aside, friends, just trust me that this is a faithful drawing of it. So you have a Greek inscription up here. Oh, sorry. Wrong. I'm left-handed. I should know better. The left hand does it. Up here in Greek, it says, as you go through it right here, Christ Jesus be with you. And on the right over here, it's about half the word of remember is there. It says, remember Proclus. Apparently, he was the one who wanted to greet people, say, Christ Jesus be with you, and remember me. Whether that's you who worship or it's Jesus who is with them, remember me also. Proclus, a good Greek name. So right here is a figure. You can see the legs standing there. Again, friends, you kind of trust me. Can you see the upraised arm right here? It's an upraised arm. It has a sword in it. Now this one is labeled, thank the Lord. It's like a modern tattoo. It says David on the arm. So now we know. And there's a pretty good-sized fellow laying over here on his side. You see just part of the head right here. And above it, it says Goliath. No doubt. Now, it's interesting. It's an Old Testament scene. Why that one when the rest are what we think of as New Testament scenes? There's no footnote, no session records. Nobody knows. You got to wonder if maybe a component of the community here were soldiers, and this was something that appealed to them. That's one way to explain it. Doesn't mean that's right. And another one is, right down the street is that synagogue with those incomparable paintings from the Old Testament, including David. So that might be it. And then it could also say, you know, David is the anointed one. And all of us who follow in his path, including the greater son of David, are also anointed. Remember, chrismation. And so this was something that they thought was fitting for the baptismal font. Who knows? But that might be an explanation. Okay, a couple of things, friends. I'm going to do about 5 or 6 minutes. We'll take a break. Can you last another 5 or 6 minutes? I hope so. Okay, so what you see on the right is a parchment. That means tanned animal skin. If you want to make a document, and it's important, then you go to the expense of tanning and preparing animal skin. It's not cheap, it would be the point. Papyrus is a little cheaper to do. Of course, it's a little easier to burn up or to lose. But this is parchment, and it has, I think it's either 14 or 15 lines. It's kind of hard to count down here at the bottom. And so what happened is, however it was destroyed or mutilated early in its history before it was covered up with rubble, it went right down the side here. So you've got half and third and fourth portions of a word. It's kind of cut cleanly right there. Then you'll see some gaps here and there. And as I mentioned to you last week, sometimes people use abbreviations, no punctuation. So there was a certain abbreviation you used for either God or Jesus in some manuscripts, and they call the nomina sacra. But that exists in this one. So when it came to Jesus, it was written a special kind of abbreviation as the Lord. So I'll show you a translation of it in just a moment. But here's the point. It's a verse or two. Let me just go ahead one here. I'll come back to Tatian, that second bullet point here in a moment. Let's just go this way. Okay, so on the left-hand side is a translation of the parchment. And of course, the brackets are what they're either guessing, and because they've got parallels in the Gospels, it's a pretty good guess. Let's agree to that part. Or sometimes they're just not quite sure, but they're doing the best they can. So you may remember after the crucifixion, there's a short part of the account where Jesus has died. It's mid-afternoon. The Sabbath is approaching. Remember, it's Friday. What to do about his body? And we're told in all four of the Gospels, there was a man named Joseph of Arimathea, and he arranges for Jesus to be interred in a tomb that he owns. It was a great act of valor. It's a wonderful part of the story. And it's one of the things that's in all four of the Gospels. So you're getting a portion of that in narrative form right here. So if you read it, that story ends by reminding us, at least in a couple of the Gospels, that there were women who had been watching what had happened at the crucifixion. There's Mary and Salome and several others. And so that's apparently in the first line that survives right here. The women who had followed him. Now it was the day of preparation. It's going to mention again the day of preparation. It's kind of an odd double mention because sometimes when you're combining sources that you remember, you see written down, you'll have a little repetition. It's not just people who talk who repeat themselves, right? Sometimes when you're copying things down. It's a very strange spelling of the term Arimathea. It's Arimathea there, an extra noon or an N. Maybe that was a different way of pronouncing it. That's been a bit of a discussion. But if you'll just look on the right hand, and trust me, friends, there are portions of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John kind of all put together. Now, there was a man named Tatian, T-A-T-I-A-N, well known in the ancient church, who had what was called a diatessaron. That's a Greek term for something through four parts. Dia is through, tessaron is four. And it was well known in the ancient church that he took the four best-known Gospels, the authoritative ones. Which ones are they? Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and he put together a kind of continuous narrative. And some people preferred that to the four Gospels. Quite a bit of discussion went on. We won't have all of that here, but it was quite a bit of discussion. In certain places, that was the more popular way to read the Gospel stories, was from something like Tatian's Harmony. His is the best known of several harmonies or Gospel parallels. You'll sometimes hear that term being used. So the question for people a lot smarter than we are, is this the earliest example of Tatian's diatessaron that exists, or is it one that's similar? We won't vote on that one either. Okay, so here's the fragment again. It's that same translation. And what I've got in relatively small print, when you put all four of the Gospels together, that's the point. So there's a reference to Zebedee. What I did was bold some of the things that will stand out from Gospel of Matthew, but it might not be in Luke, or Gospel of John, and might not be in Mark. Everybody see the method in my madness here? So whenever you see something that's bold, it's one of the more prominent examples of what is in one gospel but not in the other, even though they're telling the same story about Joseph. And the fragment here has bits and pieces of all four. That's the point I wanted to make. If you got, will you just nod your head so I can be happy? Thank you. So Matthew, Luke, John, and Mark all present this as an aspect of what happened at the end of the crucifixion. And here you've got, apparently in this fragment, I'd love to go back, see what was before it and afterward, wouldn't you? But this is what survived. And it's a fascinating window. I'll go on ahead and then we'll take a break. From this part of Syria all the way over to places like today Iran, Mesopotamia, Iraq, and so forth, for about 2 centuries, the Diatessaron, or the Gospel Harmony, was more popular than individual readings out of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. It's not that they didn't like Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They didn't like to have it in one place. And so as Christianity became the state religion, and they looked for more and more uniformity. You ever heard of that? You get centralized planning, you've got to have uniformity. The church leaders in this area said, let's collect all of these harmonies that are around. We'll set them aside, and from now on we're going to read from Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John like everybody else to the west of us. So that was a decision was made about 2 centuries past this. Okay? Let's take a break. 10 minutes. So for the next 45 minutes or so, I'm going to take you to the Mithraeum, which is formulated on the name Mithras, and a fast-growing mystery religion of the era. And one of the great examples of a Mithraeum, not surprising, was uncovered at Dura, Europos. So here is a painting, and it's a little more legible for us. And I'll show you a number of artwork presentations here of Mithras. Great examples of the local wear, the things that Mithras and the devotees would have on. They've got some great some wonderful baggy pants. I'm thinking, I just love something like big old baggy things and these great caps and so on. Okay, here we go. So I worked pretty hard on the bullet points because everything that you say about a mystery religion has to be qualified. Now, when I'm among friends like this, I'll just do the best I can. If I mess up, you're not going to hold it against me. That's true, you're not. But you get in one of these academic fora, and you have to have 55 footnotes because everything is open to interpretation because it's a mystery religion. It's one of the terms that was used even by contemporary people of the time. The Romans thought of Mithras as one of the examples of a mystery religion. Now we all know, friends, let's just kind of set the stage briefly, there are certain movements, secular and religious, they keep secrets. That's what they do. And there are people like that today. For example, this tragic element that happened in the Golan Heights that hit a Druze community. You remember this was it a couple weeks ago? The kids were out playing soccer and an errant missile came through and killed 10 of them, D-R-U-Z-E. That's a classic example of a mystery religion. They don't publish. They don't tell. When you get to be 40 years old, if you're a guy, you get a choice. Do you want to know the mysteries or not? You can't leave being a Druze, and you can't join. They don't take converts. They keep it to themselves. And there is, various kinds of examples like this. Mithras had secretive, or at the Mithraeum they had secretive practices. So people have to guess about certain things, and I'll just do my best, and I'm happy to say, I know you won't hold it against me if I get it wrong. So Mithras, go to that second bullet point, friends. Mithra was a minor deity in a polytheistic worldview that originated in what we would call today Iran, ancient Persia. And one of the religions that came out of there, and there were several you will know as Zoroastrianism. You may not have much content to go there, that's okay, but that's a term many of you will recognize. And parts of Zoroastrianism had to do with the struggle between light and dark and opposing forces and so forth. But in Mithra's earliest presentations of himself, if I could put it that way, the earliest references we have to him, there are hardly any references to worshiping him. He's a minor deity who had some warlike tendencies and liked to hunt. But it turns out that Mithras got somebody's attention, and that person was sold out to the benefits of venerating and worshiping Mithra. And one of the greatest questions for philosophy and religion of the ancient world is, who was that person? Nobody knows, because all of a sudden, boom, there it is. And the most frequent place for it, and think about this in terms of geography. The most frequent place for it was the city of Rome. This is an Iranian deity. How'd that happen? I don't know, but if I figure it out and write a book, I'm going to be famous. Mithra was associated in particular with the sun, which was either personified or a deity in its own right. S-O-L, soul. And they're often depicted together. I'll show you a couple of pictures from Dura of the two of them together towards the end. So what you see here on the right-hand side, I've got it in a couple of places. That comes from Rome. So you got a Latin inscription right here. It comes from what are called the Diocletian Baths. And the date on it's probably about 150 CE, something like that. So Dura Europos is the furthest, let me say this carefully in English, is the furthest east Mithraeum known. You see, there are not any Mithraeum in Iran or Persia. What's up with that? You think I'm joking? I'm not. That's an interesting question, isn't it? What's up with that? I don't know. So a couple of things. It seems that Mithras was understood to be a real important catalyst for creation. And the slaying of a cosmic or large bull released forces that led to the world as we now know it. Now remember, it's a deep-seated belief that life is in the blood, to quote the book of Leviticus, which in some sense is absolutely right, isn't it? No blood, no life. And so the bleeding out of the bull helped spawn creation. And also, apparently, because the bull is thought of as the driving force of fertility, that at the death of the bull, semen was released, and that helped also propagate certain things about the world. And so the slaying of the bull, sometimes called the slaying of the sacred bull, is the primary depiction of Mithraism. It's in all of the worship centers, and it's everywhere here in this little place that I'll show you. Okay, several mystery cults and religions it grew rapidly, particularly appealed, for whatever reason, to Roman soldiers. And of course, remember, soldiers are stationed all over the place and they come from different places. Once it gets into a group like that, it's able to reproduce itself quite quickly, just as Christianity did. And so in some places, they were kind of neck and neck as new emerging religions with lots of influence and a passion associated with them. Typically, a Mithraeum was underground in a cave, which befits a mystery religion. Go back to an earlier question that was asked, and you don't have to know everything about it. If you're really interested, you can kind of come with me one day, perhaps. But we don't want just kind of gawkers. We're not inviting you in until you're serious. We're underground. And they didn't write things down. There are no surviving texts which tell you about, say, the rituals. You only have hearsay of certain things. We do know that there were 7 stages of growth so that one could advance in one's knowledge and participation in the faith. Now, I don't mean this as a value judgment, but as an illustration. I had some family members who were Masons. Is that you have certain degrees, so you can advance through Masonic orders. And they have certain things they do that they don't tell you about. They're not bad, but they're internal to the group. And so Mithraism was something like that you could advance. Part of the question is whether Mithras himself developed over time, or it's just that he was able to do all these things, and then his devotees should try to advance in them. Okay, at Dura, Europos, it was atypical in that it was part of what was a house, and it developed into a Mithraeum. You know, there was a house, and then it became a synagogue in Dura, Europos, and there was a house, and then it became a church. So there's an interesting pattern there. They may well have played off each other because of the paintings and so forth that you find there that were so wonderful about Dura, Europos that you don't find elsewhere from this day and time. Okay, so this is the first of several pictures that you will see, and I will get closer to these things, so don't worry if you can't get all of the details. Excuse me, it's an expanded house. It ceased to function in 256 like the rest of the city when the city was destroyed. So a Roman encampment of soldiers developed, you'll see it here in that third bullet point right here, in the year 165 of the Common Era, CE. And the development of the Mithraeum and the settlement of the Roman soldiers coincides. And it's always the classical question, is it coincidence, correlation, causation? Hard to know. Most folks think, if I had to vote, I'd do it this way, is that the Mithraeum itself was a response to the needs of Roman soldiers at this time. But who knows for sure? So there's an inscription that you will see in a moment, and I'll show it to you, from the year 168. And it comes from, as you might imagine, a Roman soldier who was one of the captains of the archer battalion. And he was from Palmyra. So as you look at this, you've got a stone block right here that shows the slaying of the bull and 3 standing figures. I'll show a close-up in just a moment. And then you've got another stone block right below it of the slaying of the bull. It's the exact same scene, just doesn't have 3 people. It's almost like you got cross A and you had a cross B right over here. What happened is, people are asking about dedications and inscriptions. Person X said, I want to do that one. And they put it in, this is the younger of the two. And then person Y came along and said, well, I want to do one. And you know, you're in church work, you said, you want to volunteer? You're in. Right? You want to do one? Fine. So a second one was made, and in the final form, joking aside, in the final form, they put the two right beside each other. They're 3 years apart. As it turns out, as you will see, all around the side are different kind of painted scenes. But this was the center. So you've got 2 scenes of Mithras slaying the cosmic bull. Okay, so this is a great picture right here. When it was uncovered, backed up against the western wall, before it was removed, now this is black and white, so you can't see the colors, right? Shades of gray. This fellow right here on the left, His name is Franz Cumon, and he was the leader of the French Research Institute that got some of the stuff, and we were talking about going to the Louvre. Some of their stuff is in the Louvre that he got. And this is a man, he has a hard name. He's a Ukrainian immigrant to the United States. And his name is Michael Rostevzev. And he became a professor at Yale and was able to secure funding and permits and so forth to do the excavations. And so he's responsible for all that wonderful stuff at Yale, and he's responsible for the wonderful stuff in the Louvre and other places. But here they are standing when it uncovered. Can you imagine just standing there, right there, seeing the originals after you clear away all the debris? Send me. All right, here's again a nice black and white. They cleaned out a number of things, but you get a little bit of perspective there. So the center of the Mithraeum is underneath the archway here with paintings all around it. Usually this kind of thing, remember, is underground. It's atypical to have it above ground. And you'll see again what still remains of those huge western ramparts and the wall of the city for all this time. Okay, so if you go to see it displayed at Yale, it looks like that. That's a reconstruction of it. The important thing is there are paintings on the sides right here, paintings and panels here, and paintings on the inside facing each other, and paintings right here. Some are in better shape than others, as you might imagine, but there's quite a bit of detail there. Just to point ahead for a moment, I'm going to show you a close-up of the painting right here. It's almost identical to the painting over here, but the only bits and pieces of it, so I'm not going to show you any of that. It will have to suffice to see the picture of Mithras hunting on this side right here. But they're different panels. And whoever did this has some sense of symmetry. So you've got two figures, two human figures, one here and one here, very prominent, side by side, kind of balancing effect. And then you'll have these smaller panels up here. There were signs of the zodiac, as if the stars and the seasons were important for the work of Mithras. Okay. Here's yet another way to look at it so you can see how you would be funneled in as a participant. The carving scenes right there in the front with the arch, but accompanied by paintings of Mithras and his work on the sides and also on the panels. One of the rites, R-I-T-E-S, that they had in Mithras were sacred meals that they ate together. Let's see here. Okay. All right, so here's a closer up. You can see a few more details. Again, right there in the center are the two carved pieces which are dated, and I'll show you a close-up of each one of those momentarily. And so you can see figures right here which have survived well. The great Syrian and Eastern outfits that they got on. And I'm going to show you a couple of close-ups of this one in just a moment here. But that's the central niche in the frame. Okay, a diagram. The problem with this is it does not extend out like this. It's almost perpendicular coming out. This is the way they render it for us to see. But if you were to look at it closely, and you won't have that chance today, you'll see certain kind of labels of these little panels. It's really quite intricate. We also have the name, unlike in the other places, we have the name of the painter. I just want to see if you're paying attention. Okay, two phases of the Mithraeum right here. Once they start excavating, it's just like somebody who takes down a house. You can say, okay, that was an addition. I can see this, I can see this, I can see this. So here's the earlier one, and here is the later one. You can see it's not that large, number one. And number two, you kind of came almost in a procession-like to the front part. It's even more compact if you think about where it is most of the time, where it's underground. It would even give you more kind of an enclosure feel. Okay, so here's the upper panel. You will see here in good relief, here is Mithras. He got his cape and his outfit and his conical hat right there, and he's astride the bull. And in the ancient world, a typical way to dispatch an animal, whether you're going to consume a portion of the animal or sacrifice, of course, is to cut the jugular. And that's what's happening here. So he's pulling back. That's probably his friend, the son, right there. And there are a couple of other people down here. It's not quite clear who they are. There's a snake right here. So there are a number of parts of this that I bet you were really meaningful for a devotee, and I'm not smart enough to know what they mean. I can point them out to you, but I just don't know. But he being Mithras, is quite involved in the created order. He loved to hunt, and he also loved to make sure that battles were won. So that's one of the reasons that the soldiers liked him. His crown is different. Those are probably rays of the sun. That's why I say it may be Sol, S-O-L. There's no label there, but here's that kind of conical bent hat that you'll sometimes see. The question was about the head covering right here. And the person who wanted his name associated with his faith, and he was willing to invest in it. And to have this stone carving done, here he is right here with two of his good friends. They may have contributed also, and so they also made sure that they got their names there. And I don't know if these are also family members. You know, it's kind of hard to tell because there's no labels, but you do have three names, and I'll show you the inscription right here. Down at the bottom is the inscription which tells us about the date and the people. Just to let you know, I'm not making it up. Okay, I've got it in small print right there. It says, "For the god Mithras, made by," and I don't know if that literally means made or he just had it made. I suspect it was the latter. A man by the name of Zenobius, that's the masculine form. Remember, there was a queen Zenobia from Palmyra, and he's from Palmyra. It's a very interesting Aramaic name. He also has, in the Greek form, another name. Sometimes people had 2 and 3 names. There was Saul and there was Paul, right? There's Peter and there was Simon, right? So he's called Zenobius or Eliabus, the son of Yaribol. Those are all good Palmyran names. He was one of the captains of the archers, so you get a little detail there. And in the year 482, that's the guess of when the city was founded. So you see how they do the calendar? It wasn't the calendar of the Roman Empire. It wasn't the calendar of the Parthian Empire. Because of the importance of place, it was the calendar of when that city was first built. And that guess, I'm sure it's pretty accurate, pretty close. It was 480 years ago. So it's about 170 or 171 CE when this was done. So here is Zenobius right here. Now here is the lower panel. This inscription is in Aramaic. So the other one's in Greek. Either the multilingual aspect of it comes through again as it did in presentations from last week. The figure here is simply Mithras slaying the bull. There's the serpent, and here's a dog. Not quite sure the function. I don't want to make fun of it. We don't know what the function is. And here's the moon, for example, and a kind of rosette right here. So there are a number of symbols that would be important to people of the faith. And the writing down here still has some of the red coloring. I think I said this last week, and it bears emphasizing. Most of these would have been multicolored in their heyday. The colors have faded away. And so you look at that and you say, well, that looks like limestone. It was carved. It's nice carving. It's beautiful sculpture and so forth. But it would have been painted, is the point. And so you can see the red paint that goes in there, which survived. So here's the inscription right here. in good memory. You got to call these things to mind because they'll influence you in the present. You ever heard of that famous liturgy? Do this in remembrance of me. There's somebody who wants to have a good memory. You want it to last. You want it to affect his life. F. Penny is his name. Again, that's a Semitic name. He was a strategist, which means that he was an officer level. Tell you about his dad's name or his family name. He was a commander also of the archers, and he dates it in the year. So this is 168. This was done about 3 years before the previous one that I showed you. It's lower as it's now been set there in the arch. Okay, everybody with me on this? I hope that's not too tedious. I'll give you an idea of how they wanted to be displayed. Okay, so here is the reconstruction again of it. This is that left side right here of the painting. It's a hunting scene. It was on both sides, but this is the one that survived best. So remember, you've got all these panels right here. There are the two stones. We looked at both of those, and now I'm going to show you two slides right here. Oh, I wanted you to know the inscription first before we get up close. The painter's name was Moreros, and he's interested in salvation. He said, I'm going to paint, hope for salvation. Okay, so here is the close-up of the left half of that left panel. You can see Mithras right here. You see where it broke right there, but here is Mithras. As they say in Texas, and I'm not a horse person, that's side saddle, isn't it? Not really, isn't that what that is? So here's the horse going here, and here are both his legs. And here's his bow right here, and there are a number of animals out in front, and he's hunting from horseback when he's riding sides. I think, is that the right term I'm actually asking? Is that right? Okay. You know, I like horses from afar. A lot of detail in this one, including the outfit, and you can see the conical cap right here. People who are really interested in these things has to do with the garments, but also the way the horses are arrayed when they go out to battle or to hunt. So you got, it's kind of like a necklace right here, and the horse's mane is braided, and the tail will be braided. So you have everything just right if you're a deity, you're going to ride a horse. Okay, now here is the prey, P-R-E-Y, being pursued. So this is to the right. Here is the horse of Mithras. He's riding. You see, there's his left arm holding the bow. Right here, there's the arm, and there's the bow, and various kinds of animals right here all going out in front of him. Now here is the arch, the central arch, and the niche is just off of the slide right here. Here's one of the two figures we'll talk about here in just a moment. So you can see the join right there. Not being an art historian, you know, it seems to me that the paintings in the synagogue have a little higher quality. If you were here last week, I'd be interested in what you think of that. And I have no intention of demeaning this. I mean, I can't even draw my name. But this just seems to me to be a little bit less quality, you know, overall. But whoever did it was interested in salvation. Okay, so here's some of the panels, and I won't spend much time on it, just so you get an idea of the intricacy of the presentation. That's what I wanted you to see. And so it's two pictures set side by side, not one. Here's the left side and the right side. Just put them together on the PowerPoint presentation there. And I would love to know, as would a lot of people who are interested in this area, is this telling something of the connected story of Mithraism? Don't know. Probably. Okay, panels on the top here of different figures. Now, this is a reproduction, but to highlight these for you, remember when we looked at the arch, friends, on the left side there was, in a prominent place, was a male figure. Nod your head, please. You're still with me? Thank you. And this is on the right side, a little bit larger. One sitting and one standing. And this is when I was talking about, you thought I was joking, but I'm actually not. That's a set of pants right there. Can you imagine how comfortable those things got to be? You know, I can go home, kind of sit around, you know, not bell bottoms, it's kind of balloon. A wonderful, wonderful tunic right here, sash and so forth, and then the conical hat. And again, the art historians love this because they find parallels and get some idea of the culture and from the area. So let's go to this next one here, friends. Yeah, so at the time of discovery, here's the black and white photo there on the frame. On your left, wonderful to have. You kind of wish that it was in the 30s, it was out in the boonies. I wish it had some color. They didn't. It's okay. They did what they had. And so once it was cleaned, this is not a reproduction. Once it was cleaned, this is what it looks like right here. So that's about as good a detail as I'm able to provide for you. Right here. There's even some symmetry so that the hat right here, as you're facing it on the right side, it leans towards the middle. If you go on the other side, the hat leans towards the middle. I mean, Moreros really liked symmetry, I think. Interesting question. Obviously a prominent person. Is this Mithras? I mean, there were two pictures of him slaying the bull. Is this Mithras both times? Is it a priest? They did have priests, but we know almost nothing about them. A prophet? Who knows? Now, here's one, it'll sound like a bit of a reach to you, but I'm not sure that it is. The garb here, the garments, are fairly typical of priestly figures and upper class people from the East. In early Christianity, when they tried to render what the Magi who came from the East looked like, it's an outfit like that they normally are rendered with, because it's typical. Doesn't mean it's right, it just means it was typical of the time. Now, again, a quick story, if I may. In the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem, which would have been initially built, about 100 years after this, one of the depictions that took place over time, it may not have been in the first version, was of the Magi coming, because it's the Church of the Nativity. A group of Persians, as they come through periodically, came through in the year 614 and were destroying, so they marauding, destroyed a bunch of churches, and they got to the church in Bethlehem and they saw the Magi, they left it standing. Because they said, we recognize those persons because of the garb, of the garments. Okay, rites. We know very little about them. They did have them. This depiction of Mithras here is not from Palmyra. It's just a typical one. Blood was considered sacred, restorative, life-giving. Salvation over death was promised to devotees because Mithras could provide it. They had sacred meals and fellowship together, but all underground or in secret. Okay, so Mithraic rites as mysteries. That was the term that goes all the way back, my friends, to contemporary writers in Rome about Mithras and other kinds of cults which were secretive. So you'll often see in books and articles that term being used. So I just took a couple of books just to illustrate this for you, a couple of comments I hope will put things in a little bit broader perspective. So one way to try to explain things as best you can write a book called The Mysteries of Mithras. Makes perfect sense, a great title, accurate, helpful. Now, what's the subtitle there? It says the pagan belief that shaped the Christian world. I'm not sure that's right. I'm not interested in fighting, but I'm not sure that's quite the best way to phrase things. They were rivals for a while and did have influence. If you want to say that Mithras had influence in the Roman Empire, was a rival with Christianity for the affections of people, all that's true. All that is true. Or here's one, this is a pretty good book, Should You Be Interested? By David Ulansey. Will set out for you in some detail, maybe more than you want to know, about the Mithraic mysteries and so forth. Now, are there some connections between Mithraism and Christianity? And the answer is yes. Geography, fast growing, provided a comprehensive view of the world. It promised instruction and transformation in this life and life in the world to come. They had all those things in common. But what other things they may have had in common, and certainly where they diverged, it's hard to know because of the lack of contemporary sources from them. They don't have a New Testament or an Old Testament or a baptismal liturgy or a Eucharistic liturgy and things like that in Mithraism. I do want to say one more word, friends, kind of for our own comprehension, about the word mystery. You know, it's a good New Testament term, mystery. You'll find it also in the Old Testament. And there are references. Paul will write, for example, to the Colossians and Ephesians and talk about the mysteries that have now been revealed. That he means there are certain things about the coming of Jesus that were anticipated. Look at your Old Testament, Paul would say. There are certain things that Jesus accomplished which were not so anticipated and not widely recognized until cross and resurrection. And then people said, aha. That's one use of mystery. What was accomplished in Christ and what the Mithraic folks might say was greater than the expectations that people might have had. And in the second sense, it's used particularly by our friends in the East. Our friends in the East, by that I mean Eastern Orthodox and so forth, they will say that a sacrament like the Eucharist or baptism is a mystery. It's not irrational, but it is deeper than can be put adequately into language. So think, for example, and I kind of feel a sermon coming on, sorry. Think of all the discussion in the larger, magnificent church about how is Christ present at communion. For centuries, people got to fighting over that, right? Got excommunicated and so forth. Now, our Eastern Orthodox friends would say, Jesus is there, the risen Lord is there, but it's a mystery. You can't get all of it. Accept it in faith. It's true. It's larger, it's not unrational, it's larger, it's trans-rational. You have to feel it to know it. Yes, he's there. And so they would talk about a number of things as mysteries, or the incarnation. You can't figure out how one is both God and man. It's true. It's a mystery, and God did it. All right, sermon's over, sorry. But that's the point of the language of mystery. It has a variety of, sorry, Bill. So, those last two bullet points, take a look at those quickly if you would. So, both of the religions emphasize the transformative power of sacrifice. Both the sacrifice that you make, but more importantly, which is made for you. Transform your life. Good forever. Blood is the symbol of that. Mithraism offered enlightenment and salvation, but it fit in a polytheistic worldview. Christianity offered enlightenment and salvation in a monotheistic worldview. So that's one of the important differences there. So here's a book. Wouldn't recommend it to you. The Mithraic Origins of Christianity. There's no such thing. But it's amazing what you can find on the internet in there. Okay, so a popular understanding of how the cosmos worked on a daily basis from the ancient world goes all the way back to the Greeks. You will probably know this. Remember the name of the deity who drove the chariot? His name was Helios in Greek mythology, where we get the term heliocentric. Helios drove the chariot, and so the sun could move. I mean, you got to have some power to move, right? Helios would drive the chariot, and the sun would move through the skies all the way through, and the cycle repeated itself. And so what the Romans called the unconquerable sun, you can't beat it or stop it. You might have clouds and rain for a day, but you will not stop the sun. And it's important to know how the sun works and the seasons and calendars and so forth. And apparently Mithras was integrated into this. It's hard to know how. So here is Sol Invictus, or Sol Invictus right here. And there's Mithras, and there's his famous hat. Love the colors, by the way. Can you imagine how vibrant that was when it was first done? And part of a connected presentation? I would love to have seen that. And I'll show you a close-up of it again here in a moment. But here's one of the interesting things about Mithraism and Christianity. December 25 was a really important day in parts of the Roman Empire. Mithraism contributed to that, as did appreciation for Sol Invictus. Now remember, I guess is it the winter solstice? Is that the right term? It happens right about the December 22nd, 21st, 22nd, somewhere like that. And so by the 25th, whew, a little more light. A couple more minutes here. We're going in the right direction. And so December 25th was important for a variety of reasons. Now, please, friends, don't take this as a polemical or a skeptical comment. Who knows whether Jesus was born on December 25th? That became attached to Jesus because it was already recognized as an important time in the larger culture. If you actually go back and do a little research, you'll find in the surviving records, of course, it's only a portion of what was there, there's several discussions eventually about when he was born, and it's all over the map. But December 25th was decided upon, particularly by the western side of the empire. On the eastern side, you may remember, it's January the 6th is the important part of what we call Christmas. So there was no universal agreement, but December 25th is one of the things, quite frankly, that Mithraism and Christianity had in common. I say had because there ain't no Mithraism anymore. But there is Christianity, which is the largest religion in the world. But they do share that date. Okay, friends, I think I've got one more to show you, and then we'll call it a morning. Yeah, here's the close-up cleaned up with the colors of Sol Invictus right here and Mithras right here, and they're sharing a sacred meal together. I sure would love to have seen the complete panel, get some idea what they were up to. Friends, thanks for coming out if you were here last week and this week in about 3 hours or so to see all the wonderful things that came out of Dura Europos. You get some snapshots of the past. I hope it was of interest to you. It's my favorite subject is talking about the ancient world, so thanks for coming. I appreciate it. I do, yes.
Has anyone from Lifelong Learning